What's up, everybody? We're back. Core Use Bloody History. We are going to wrap up this document today. It's probably going to be a shorter episode. I think it'll probably be like half hour, maybe a little longer. But I just want to get through this document and see if this gives us any branches on places to go with it. See if we're going to take this beyond today's episode or not. I'll be honest with you. There's so much on fucking Ruby I haven't even gotten to in any of my research. Ruby has been one of those, just like Clay Shaw, has been one of those people I've unfortunately neglected. And eventually I'll get to it. So I know there's a 5,000-page FBI document that's a compilation of documents on Jack Ruby, and I can't seem to locate it. I had it at one time, and I can't seem to find it now. It might have been at archive.org. But the way they restructured everything, they don't want you to find documents at archive.org anymore. It was bought by one of them, and it's so difficult to find what you need. When I used to be able to go in and put in any search and it would come right up, now it's fucking virtually impossible to find anything on that goddamn site. So we are going to continue. I think this is where I left off. 6/27/64, Dallas. Condemned slayer Jack Ruby reportedly asked for a lie detector test and was promised one by Earl Warren during his recent visit there by the Chief Justice. But the Dallas Times Herald quoted an informed source as saying the test was never given. Ruby also was described as apprehensive about Warren's safety while in Dallas. Ruby told Mr. Warren that some people in Dallas think no more of him than they do Ruby, and that the Chief Justice might not live more than 30 minutes after he left the county jail, the source said to the Dallas Times Herald, and that's from the AP. 6/28/64, Dallas. Defense attorney Joe Tannehill denied that condemned murderer Jack Ruby told Chief Justice Earl Warren that the killing of Lee Harvey Oswald was premeditated. Tannehill took exception to published reports on a conversation between Ruby and Warren at the Dallas County Jail. (7/4/64), Washington. The commission questioned Mark Lane in open session. Looks like that happened on July 3rd. Lane also refused to give the name of an informant who, he said, told him about a meeting of Jack Ruby and others at the Carousel Club in Dallas. From the New York Times. 7/6/64, Oswald rented his box 11-1. Ruby rented his box 11-7. Both boxes at Terminal Annex Post Office. Oswald's other box was at the main post office, through which he received rifle. (7/7/64), Jack Ruby and Lee Harvey Oswald rented post office boxes just 12 feet apart, less than a month before President Kennedy was assassinated. It's from the Dallas Times Herald. Both received mail in the boxes during those 3 weeks. Both used their real names. The story said investigative officials and presumably the Warren Commission have known about the boxes since shortly after the assassination. 7/8/64, Dallas. Dallas Times Herald quoted an informed source today as saying Jack Ruby discussed killing Lee Harvey Oswald with his sister many hours before he shot the accused assassin of President Kennedy. The source said Ruby mentioned shooting Oswald during a conversation with his sister, Eva Grant, 1 or 2 days before the 11/24 slaying in the basement of City Hall. Yes, and I can agree. I don't know that actually happened, but I could agree with it because he obviously got the order to kill Oswald from Al Gruber after Oswald gets arrested. So sometime after 2:00 p.m. on November 22nd, he gets the order. So yeah, he had 2 days to talk about it. Quote, Jack mentioned shooting Oswald to Mrs. Grant, and she tried to talk him out of it. They had a big argument about it, said the source who declined to be identified. Mrs. Grant, however, told the Times Herald that such conversation never took place. Ruby never said a thing like that, she declared. Information about the conversation was reportedly related to by Ruby to Chief Justice Earl Warren during his visit to Ruby's cell last month, the sources said. It's from the AP. On 7/8/64, attorney Melvin Belli and New York newsman Mickey Carroll have finished their book about the Ruby trial, but all of a sudden the publishers are ducking. Melvin is talking darkly about pressure from H.L. Hunt. San Francisco Chronicle by Herb Caen, C-A-E-N. 7/9/64, Dallas. Attorneys for Jack Ruby told Sheriff Bill Decker that the slayer attacked one of them during a county jail conference today. The incident took place shortly after another defense lawyer said Ruby had expressed a desire to talk with District Attorney Henry Wade. Clayton Fowler said it. Attorneys Phil Burleson and Joe Tannehill said Ruby tried to swing at Burleson, but the lawyer escaped injury. Decker quoted Burleson as saying that Ruby made a swinging motion when he became angry during the afternoon conference. Ruby denies that he did so, but I'm sure he did, Decker said. 7/12/64, Detroit, a Detroit psychiatrist, Dr. Emmanuel Tanay, T-A-N-A-Y, made 2 visits to the Dallas County Jail after being retained by Ruby's family last May 14th. Tanay told Don Beck, staff writer for the Detroit Free Press, in a copyrighted story published today, he found Ruby to be, quote, like a caged animal. Ruby definitely wants to commit suicide, Tanay said. 7/17/64, Dallas, an application was filed in probate court Thursday, 7/16, to have a legal guardian appointed for Jack Ruby. The application, filed by chief defense lawyer Clayton Fowler on behalf of Ruby's brother, Sam Ruby, claims the convicted killer of Oswald is, quote, of unsound mind and wholly incompetent. This is one of the few rare appearances you'll see of the name Sam Ruby. He's fucking virtually been erased from history, and for good reason. Ruby was sentenced to death in March for the slaying of Oswald. His family and lawyers have maintained his mental condition steadily has grown worse since then. Judge W.F. Bartlett Jr. has called a hearing 8/6 to determine if Ruby needs a guardian. San Francisco News Call Bulletin. 7/19/64, Dallas. Story on Ruby's lie detector test the day before. Tonahill said the polygraph test was administered by 2 FBI men, one from Austin and one from Dallas. Also on hand was Dr. William Beavers, Ruby's psychiatrist. That's the 3rd psychiatrist we've heard for Ruby, right? The first being Jolly West, the second being the guy we mentioned a minute ago, and this is the 3rd. Also present for the tests were Chief Defense Counsel Clayton Fowler of Dallas, Arlen Specter of Philadelphia, representing the Warren Commission, Assistant District Attorney William F. Alexander, and a jailer. Oh my God, would I want these fucking people in the room with me if I'm given a lie detector staring at me? Really? Arlen Specter, creator of the Magic Bullet Theory, and William Alexander, who was present during all the shit with Gerald Hill over at the fucking Abundant Life Temple and at the secondhand junk shop on Jefferson? Knowing conspirators? I don't fucking think so. God damn. So there is a transcript of this polygraph. I'm going to have to find it. There's so much shit on Jack Ruby that I just haven't even got to. There's thousands of fucking pages. I could literally just do a podcast on Jack Ruby and just read Jack Ruby documents forever, and we'd never get to the end. That's how fucking many there are. But I do want to get to Ruby. He really doesn't. Here's the fucking weird thing. Like, Ruby doesn't really play in any of my original book, does he? Barely any at all. In the update, will he play a role? Barely any at all. Will he play any role in the next book I write on the Israelis and the assassination? I've only got 1 chapter so far dedicated to him. So, he was of utmost importance, right? But where? Where was he of utmost importance? I feel like I have to get through the update to this book and the next book before I even get to Jack Ruby. Really, because I spent 5 years doing fucking research. I got the shit in my head already. It's got to be put on paper before I get to new research. It's kind of how I feel about it. Even though what we're doing here is somewhat new research. So when I wrote the book, I didn't take notes or none of that shit. I had a couple different weird phases on how I did things. There were times when I just sat there and read for 6 or 8 hours and didn't take a fucking note because I just remember it all. It just makes sense. So the story makes sense. So I remember it. Then there were times that I was going through things. This is weird how I did this because I had a laptop upstairs that I was doing the research, and I had my iMac downstairs that I was doing the slide presentations and the putting together of the PDF files and stuff with all the notes, right? And so that's kind of how my time was split between actually just sitting there and fucking reading for hours at a time, and then other times when I would be digging for stuff to screenshot to put into my note selection. So yeah, Ruby is so important, and I haven't even touched him yet. I haven't even fucking touched him yet, but I'm gonna have to touch him eventually, right? So what I'm really curious about is Ruby's background with the CIA and the FBI and the shit that he was doing in New Haven, Connecticut with the fucking communists. What the fuck was Ruby and his brother Earl doing with communists in New Haven, Connecticut? I mean, give me a fucking break. I just scratched the surface on that shit. And that's the whole fucking rabbit hole of communists in motherfucking Connecticut. Give me a fucking break. That's some good ass milk. I love me some milk. I should get me a fucking cow. All right. So, Where are we at? Ruby was sentenced to death in March for the slaying of Oswald. His family and lawyers are maintaining his mental condition steadily growing worse. Of course. All right, we've already gone through most of this. We went through Mr. Tonahill talking about the polygraph test administered by Dr. William Beavers and all that stuff. Let me see. No data legal advisor for Jack Ruby's family fired Clayton Fowler as the Slayer's chief defense attorney Wednesday. And Ruby said he wanted Fowler to continue to represent him. Dam said he was firing me on behalf of the Ruby family, Fowler related. I thought Jack should have had some voice in who represents him. So I went to the county jail and asked him whether he wanted me to continue as his lawyer. He said he did. In fact, he put it in writing. Fowler showed reporters a note scribbled on a sheet of yellow tablet paper in Ruby's neat handwriting. The note said, "It would be my desire to continue with Mr. Clayton Fowler as my attorney and to handle all of my legal matters pertinent to my case. Jack Ruby, P.S. Regardless of any opposition from any other attorneys who are attempting to disassociate me from receiving the services of Clayton Fowler." It's from Dallas Morning News by Carl Freund. 723-64 Dallas, Miss Eva Grant, Jack's sister, last night in a radio interview blasted inefficiency in the defense efforts since the family fired Melvin Belli. She also asked Sheriff Bill Decker to prevent Tonahill from visiting Ruby in jail. From the Associated Press. 723-64 Dallas. Story about 11/16 issue of Wall Street Journal found in Ruby's car. He denied knowing anything about it. J.E. Bradshaw, vice president of Southwestern Drug Company, a major wholesale company, said the newspaper was his. Bradshaw said he could not explain how the newspaper got into Ruby's automobile. Said he was on vacation in Arizona at the time. Bradshaw said he did not know Ruby. So that makes a whole lot of sense. A guy who never met Ruby, doesn't know Ruby, has a newspaper who's out of state, and that newspaper on that day happens to make it into Ruby's car, but they're saying it was this guy. Does it make any sense? Not at all. Of course not. 723-64 Dallas. Ruby's chief lawyer, Clayton Fowler, said today that the 4 Texas lawyers who have been representing the convicted slayer will continue as the sole participants in the appeal of Ruby's case. The controversy had arisen when Sol Dan, S-O-L-D-A-N-N, that's a name, sought to dismiss Fowler and Joe Tonahill. Fowler said Dan objected to a polygraph test given to Ruby last Saturday. Fowler said Ruby had been looking forward to the lie detector test given him by the Warren Commission in his cell. Said Ruby believed the test would show, 1, that Ruby has no collusion with Oswald, and 2, that's correct, and 2, that no premeditation was involved in the killing of Oswald. That is not correct. 724-64. Another Ruby attorney, Joe Tonahill, said that Dan fired him during a telephone conversation last Saturday, 718. Dallas Morning News. 725-64. When he was first told of the murder on Friday afternoon, 11:22, in the advertising office of the Dallas News, his first words were, "My life is over." Not Kennedy's life, my life. To his sister, he said, "I'm dead." Saturday Evening Post, the untold story of Jack Ruby. Well, that wasn't Jack Ruby, that was Samuel Ruby, so those words have no meaning. 725-64, quoting Sergeant Patrick T. Dean, testifying at Ruby's trial regarding conversation with Ruby shortly after he shot Oswald. Quote, Ruby said something to the effect that he thought about the killing 2 nights prior when he saw Oswald on the show-up stand. Ruby said he believed in due process of law, but he was too torn up and emotional about this event. He said this man not only killed the president, but also shot Officer Tippit, and that the outcome of the trial would be he would be given the death penalty inevitably, and he didn't see any sense for a lengthy trial that would subject Mrs. Kennedy to coming back to Dallas to testify. Belli was now shouting for a mistrial. That man's constitutional rights have been violated, he said. Wade pressed on, asked Dean what Ruby had said. Dean, quote, he said when he first noticed the sarcastic sneer on Oswald's face, that was when he first thought he'd kill him if he'd got the chance. And also that he guessed he wanted to show the world to know Jews have guts. Saturday Evening Post, the untold story of Jack Ruby by Edward Lynn. 728-64 Dallas. Lawyers for condemned slayer Jack Ruby today filed 15 formal bills of exception in seeking a reversal of the death penalty assessed him in March for the slaying of Lee Harvey Oswald. One of the exceptions contended that a prosecution witness, Dallas Police Sergeant Patrick Dean, gave perjured testimony. Let's pull Patrick Dean's testimony, please. The court erred when it refused to allow the defense to ask prospective jurors if they were members of the John Birch Society. It refused to let the defense enter into evidence the murder complaints sworn out against Oswald in regards to Kennedy's death. 72964 Dallas, Detroit lawyer Saul Dan has indicated he may renew his efforts to dismiss Clayton Fowler and Joe Tannehill as lawyers for Jack Ruby. Dan told the Dallas Times-Herald yesterday in a letter he intends to remain lawyer for Ruby and the Ruby family. Quote, there is a proper time and place where I expect there will be a complete airing and investigation of those who have been derelict in their duties and responsibilities, Dan wrote. The Detroit lawyer also hinted that, in his opinion, one of the grounds for appeal is the conflict of interest and failure on the part of certain lawyers to fully and properly represent Jack Ruby. Okay, so let's put some things together here. 2 and 2 equals 4 again. So we got Detroit lawyer. Okay, why is Detroit significant? Because that's where Earl Ruby lives. That's where Earl Ruby's just outside of Detroit, whatever that means. Probably in a suburb somewhere. But he's up there running a bunch of washaterias. Just like Samuel Ruby owned in Dallas. And just like Larry Crawford, after Larry Crawford on November 22nd, hitchhiked and fled his way out of Dallas and made his way to Detroit, where he went to go work where? At a washateria. Could he have gone to work for Earl Ruby? Fucking A, he could have. Probably did. Coincidence? No such thing. 73164 Dallas, a hearing to appoint a guardian for accused slayer Jack Ruby has been postponed indefinitely. Probate judge F.W. Bartlett Jr. said yesterday Ruby's chief defense attorney, Clayton Fowler of Dallas, received permission to withdraw from the case. Saul Dan, the Ruby family's legal advisor from Detroit, who had originally proposed the guardianship request, said he needed more time to arrange for another lawyer to handle the case. The hearing had been set for 8/6, and the judge said he would await developments before setting a new date. Judge Bartlett said that he had been told Dan cannot participate in the hearing unless associated with a Texas lawyer because he is not licensed in the state. So let's just get to the bottom of this lawyer scenario. So he had an initial lawyer who was then replaced by Melvin Belli. Melvin Belli gets canned, and he gets replaced by these two, Clayton Fowler and the other guy, Bartlett. No, not Bartlett. Bartlett's the judge. But Clayton Fowler and the other guy. And then Sol Dan comes in, who's from Detroit, probably organized by Earl Ruby, mob connection, mob lawyer, probably, to come in and handle it. So it's probably, this is what I'm seeing. I'm seeing that Ruby got a lawyer, and then immediately he was cut off by the LA mob, who stuck Melvin Belli in there to protect their own interests, right? And so make sure that nothing came out that he didn't want to come out. Then after he gets taken off the case, 2 Joe Schmoes are put on the case, and those Joe Schmoes are then removed from the case by another mob attorney to make sure that the mob interests are taken care of and not exposed. That makes perfect sense to me. Let me see. Judge Bartlett said he had been told Dan cannot participate in the hearing unless associated with Texas lawyer because he's not licensed in the state. 8864 Dallas. Judge Joe Brown rejected today defense contentions that he made errors in the trial of Jack Ruby. The judge's actions cleared the way for consideration of the case by the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals. The appeals court in Austin should hear the case in January or February. If it refused a new trial, the recourses left to Ruby are the United States Supreme Court and finally the governor of Texas, John Connally, who was seriously wounded in the Kennedy slaying. The defense's main contention is that Police Sergeant Patrick Dean perjured himself when he said Ruby, 10 minutes after Oswald was shot, said he had thought about it 2 days. New York Times. 8864, according to Warren Boroson, Boroson, who interviewed Melvin Belli for the July-August issue of Fact magazine, Belli revealed that H.L. Hunt, right-wing Texas oil millionaire, offered him $100,000 not to defend Ruby. Since the trial, he said, Dallas millionaires have launched a Get Belli movement, the results which he described as follows. After I got back to San Francisco, I found that my insurance policies had been canceled. A book publisher had reneged on a contract to bring out my book, Black Date Dallas. My mortgages were called, my name withdrawn from official lists of lawyers, my credit frozen, TV shows and lectures canceled. I'm not paranoid, but it's those wealthy Texans who were behind it. You can't imagine the strength and power of that wicked city of Dallas. National Guardian. 8/14/64 Dallas. Melvin Belli paid a surprise visit to Jack Ruby in the Dallas County Jail late night. At the jail for conference were several of Ruby's present attorneys, including Phil Burleson. Quote, I haven't been invited to re-enter the case, and I would refuse if I were, Belli declared. 8/18/64 Dallas. The Times-Herald, attributing its information to unnamed sources, said Ruby told Warren that he had lied to local authorities only once following his arrest after he had shot Oswald. Ruby said that he had lied when he told officers he had his pistol with him on Friday night, the day of the assassination, at a show-up in the basement of City Hall. 8/19/64, story on interview of Ruby by Warren on 6/7. Miss Kilgallen said she obtained a transcript from sources close to the Warren Commission in Washington. From the transcript, it seemed to her that Warren and J. Lee Rankin were, quote, acutely aware of the talk, both here and in Europe, that President Kennedy was a victim of a conspiracy. Ruby denied knowing J.D. Tippit. Ruby asked Warren to get him to Washington. Ruby did not admit, but never directly denied, that meeting took place between Weissman, Tippit, and himself. Dorothy Kilgallen, San Francisco Examiner. 8/19/64, from Dorothy Kilgallen's transcript of Warren's questioning of Ruby. Ruby, is there any way you getting me to Washington? Warren, I don't know of any. I will be glad to talk to your counsel about what the situation is, Mr. Ruby, when we get an opportunity to talk. Ruby, I don't think I will get a fair representation with my counsel, Joe Tonnahill. I don't think so. I would like to request that I go to Washington. 8/19/64, Washington. The Kilgallen article did not add much to what emerged at Ruby's public trial. Ruby said that he had been dissuaded from taking the stand in his own defense by his lawyer at the time, Melvin Belli. 8/19/64, Mel Belli today said the assertion Lee Oswald's killer was barred by him from taking the witness stand is utterly false. I don't really look to Melvin Belli as a reliable witness, do you? 8/19/64, Washington. 8/18. Officials of the Warren Commission expressed distress today at the publication of testimony supposedly held for group's forthcoming report. Transcript of the Warren interview of Ruby in Dallas. A commission employee said that on superficial examination, the article did appear to contain the verbatim testimony. He said the commission had given it to no newspaper and that it had no idea how the transcript had gotten out. Joe Tonnahill was also present at questioning of Ruby and is believed to have been sent a copy of the stenographic transcript for correction. The Dallas Times-Herald also published an article today purporting to quote from the testimony. Some observers suggest that the transcript might therefore have been obtained in Dallas, New York Times. From 8/19 through 21/64, from the San Francisco Examiner. Apparently incomplete version of Dorothy Kilgallen's transcript of Warren's questioning of Ruby. Ruby says he cannot tell the truth in Dallas, that his life is in danger, and he begs repeatedly to be taken to Washington and testify. When you leave here, I am finished. You won't ever see me again. Asked to speak to Warren in private. Denies having known Oswald. Speaking of entering the basement, indicates he walked past an officer talking to Sam Pease. Pease not questioned by the commission. In a car parked up on the curb. Says there was no conspiracy involved in his killing Oswald, but says there is a plot to spread this rumor. Suggests plot includes murder of himself and harm to his family, also danger to Warren. Names the John Birch Society as part of this plot. Denies that he was at Parkland after the assassination, although he was seen there. He was seen there by... Oh, what the fuck's that reporter's name? Seth Cantor. Seth Cantor. Or Cantner. One of those two fucking things. But that guy's a fucking liar, too, associated with CIA, so you really can't believe what he said. But he most certainly saw either Jack Ruby or Sam Ruby at... Let me see. Could it have been Samuel Ruby? Well, we got... No, it couldn't have, because we got Samuel Ruby on film at the Dallas Morning News, roughly 12:45 to 12:50 p.m., Kennedy shot 12:30. Ruby on scene, allegedly, when Kennedy arrives. That means that Ruby would have been on scene at the same time. Yeah, so it was definitely Jack Ruby at the hospital, not Samuel Ruby, because he's still at the Dallas Morning News this time. 8/21/64, from Dorothy Kilgallen's story of the Warren interview. Warren to Ruby, I know what you feel about the John Birch Society. Of course, I don't have all the information that you feel you have on that subject. Unfortunately, Ruby countered, you don't. San Francisco Examiner. 8/21/64, Washington. The commission said yesterday a federal investigation has been started into the premature publication of some testimony into the commission. In a telegram to Malcolm Epley, E-P-L-E-Y, executive director of the Independent Press Telegram of Long Beach, Rankin said, quote, the commission has directed me to advise you that no member of the commission or its staff has divulged or made available to any news media any portion of the testimony before the commission. San Francisco Examiner. 8/22/64, Boston. Melvin Belli says he's shocked and horrified by the premature disclosure of Warren Commission testimony taken from Jack Ruby. Belli said this amounts to a confession by Ruby, trapped into it at a time when he faces the electric chair and before his appeal has been heard. 8/25/64, Dallas. Defense lawyers have added documents to the official record of the Jack Ruby murder trial. To back their claim, a key prosecution witness gave false testimony. I think they're still talking about that cop, Patrick Dean. The documents were affidavits signed by Dallas and Fort Worth television newsmen and lawyers. They supported defense claims that Police Sergeant Patrick Dean did not tell the truth about his conversation with Ruby after the shooting of Oswald. Filing of the documents represents the final local step in the appeal of a death penalty verdict returned 3/14. 8/29/64, story on series of articles by Dorothy Kilgallen on Warren's questioning of Ruby, published in the New York Journal American, 8/18. Mark Lane had informed the commission months before the Ruby Tippett Wiseman meeting at the Carousel. Yet throughout the 3 hours of testimony, Justice Warren permitted Ruby to ramble, twist, and dodge, and never answer directly the questions whether he knew Tippett or had been with him at the Carousel that night. Even more bizarre, Justice Warren added a fourth man to the table, quote, a rich Texas oil man whom Lane says he never mentioned. Significant was Ruby's reply to Warren's question. Quote, who was the rich oil man? Ruby replied, he never admitted the meeting took place. He never denied it. National Guardian. 8/29/64. Well, actually, let's go ahead and pull the documents on Ruby's alleged leaked testimony if we can find it anywhere, guys. 8/29/64, Dorothy Kilgallen last winter reported that Dallas Attorney Wade was ready to confront Ruby on the stand with 10 witnesses who would say that he knew Oswald. Soon thereafter, it was announced that Ruby would not take the stand. 8/29/64, note on Warren's questioning of Ruby, who, quote, seemed far more terrified of ending up a victim of alleged plotters than of the electric chair. Justice Warren took the whole agitated outburst in stride and consulted his watch to note that it would soon be time for launch. 9/3/64, Fort Worth. Karen Lynn Bennett, Little Lynn, the stripper who made headlines during Jack Ruby murder trial, had resumed her nightclub career. She said her appearance will be her swan song as an exotic dancer. She did not reveal her plans beyond that point. Remember, take note that she was in Dealey Plaza on November 22nd, 1963, and that whole fucking weekend, her man, Bruce Lee Carlin? Was that Bruce Carlin? Was that his name? He was the one driving around fucking Houston, Dallas, New Orleans, all the fuck over the place, and I still need to do a deep dive into that motherfucker. So, 9/25/64, Dallas District Judge Joe B. Brown today granted attorneys for Jack Ruby a 30-day delay in presenting a full record of his case in court for the appeal of his death penalty. The defense petition contended that more time was needed because court reporters have not finished transcribing the voluminous records of Ruby's trial. Assistant District Attorney Jim Bowie said the state would challenge their request for another delay by the defense in appealing the case. 9/27/64. The San Francisco attorney Melvin Belli said tonight he has agreed to file an appeal brief for Jack Ruby. Belli said in an interview that Ruby asked him to do so and that he agreed. Quote, I'm satisfied the Ruby verdict will be reversed. Every lawyer knows it will, and the district attorney in Dallas knows it too, Belli said. Belli said his office has almost completed work on the Ruby brief. He said it will be based on what he called concrete evidence that a police officer committed perjury during Ruby's trial, and the argument that Ruby should have been granted the right to be tried in a city other than Dallas. 9/27/64, story says Ruby lied to Earl Warren when he said he asked to testify at his trial, but he had been prevented doing so by Melvin Belli. That defense has in its files notes in Ruby's handwriting stating that he refused to testify. Oh, I wonder if there's any notes from Melvin Belli in his case. I wonder if there's a PDF out there containing all of Belli's notes. That'd be great. Story suggests collusion between police and Ruby, enabling him to enter basement of police department building. Story says Bill DeMar, memory expert performing at Carousel Club, cannot be located. Because that's not his real fucking name, you idiots. 92864, story on publication of Warren report dealing with its report on Ruby, says he was in financial difficulties and owed some $40,000 in federal taxes. AP Francis Lewin, God damn it, that's like $400,000 in today's money. It's a lot of fucking money. 92864, Dallas. Jack Ruby learned the Warren Commission report Sunday from his sister, Mrs. Eva Grant, but she said he just didn't comprehend it. Sheriff Bill Decker said he also visited Ruby's jail cell to deliver mail. He didn't say a word about the report, San Francisco News called Bulletin. 92864, Washington. The commission pieced together the painstaking account on the theory that if Ruby had been involved in a conspiracy, his activities and associations during this period, 1121 to 1124, would in some way have reflected the conspiratorial relationship. The other commission concludes regarding Ruby were that he, quote, was not acquainted with Oswald, had no connection to the Communist Party, had no connection with ultra-conservative causes, and was not significantly linked to organized crime. All four of those things are bullshit. The second one still needing much research. But remember, between 1121 and 1124, Samuel Ruby was making the rounds as Jack Ruby while Jack went to Galveston and did a whole bunch of other shit that I don't know about. So the commission specifically discounted an allegation by Mark Lane that Ruby, Bernard Weissman, and J.D. Tippett had met at Ruby's Carousel Club on 1114. Well, when Ruby was arrested and asked if he knew Officer Tippett, he said, "Which one? There's 3 Tippetts." So yes, he knew him. 92864, Chronicle story on publication of Warren report dealing with Ruby's activities in San Francisco area 1933 to 1937, sold racetrack tip sheets, etc. San Francisco Chronicle. 92864, story on publication of Warren report dealing with Ruby's entry to police department basement, quotes the report, quote, videotapes taken without interruption before the shooting show Ruby standing at the foot of the ramp on Main Street side before the shooting. See Commission Exhibit 2635 in the Warren Report. 10364, before Ruby had an opportunity to answer the question as to whether or not he was at such a meeting, Ruby Tippett Wiseman at the Carousel, 111463. Chief Justice Earl Warren said, quote, I did feel that our record should show that we would ask you the question and that you would answer it and that you have answered it. No direct question was ever asked of Ruby in reference to his attending such a meeting by the Commission. The Commission nevertheless concluded that Ruby denied that he attended such a meeting. The transcript of Ruby's testimony shows conclusively that Ruby never made such a denial and that no direct question as to his attendance at such a meeting was ever asked. It's in an article by Mark Lean at the National Guardian, 10364, Dallas. Ruby is suspicious and wary, particularly of his own attorneys, I'm assuming. Tona Hill said the defense psychiatrist, not identified, calls Ruby's reaction typical of a psychotic, depressed paranoid. He has strong suicidal tendencies and will commit suicide if he can. He's wary of his own attorneys and overly fond of the prosecuting attorneys who want to see him executed. AP Peggy Simpson. See Ruby, 111564, Associated Press. Sid Moody. 10664, Dallas. Jack Ruby believes the Warren Commission report proved of little value to dispelling rumors that he was involved in a plot to assassinate President Kennedy. Ruby's chief defense lawyer, Clayton Fowler, said today, Fowler believes Ruby, quote, lacks the mental capacity to understand the meaning and significance of the report. It appears there's been further deterioration of his condition, the attorney said. Fowler said the defense does not, however, plan to renew or request that Sheriff Bill Decker transfer Ruby to a mental hospital for treatment. Jack isn't a raving maniac, Fowler said, but it appears to me as a layman that his condition is slowly deteriorating. 10764. The first man who took that job as Ruby's lawyer was Constantine Alfred Droby, president of the Criminal Bar Association of Dallas, who was interviewed by Gene Campbell for the London Evening Standard of 10764. Quote, I said I would defend Jack, he told me, but I had to give it up before I really started as my wife's life was threatened by anonymous phone calls and we were told our house was to be blown up by dynamite. However, Droby told me that as Ruby's attorney, he had rushed around to Ruby's apartment soon after the shooting with Jim Cothy, a Dallas news reporter. The place was in chaos. I think we were the first people to see it. You remember anything especially, I said. No, just chaos and newspapers, Droby answered. I wonder if Jim Coth saw anything, I asked. Mr. Droby folded his hands and leaned forward. Coates murdered, he said. He was choked to death the Monday before last. London Evening Standard. Gene Campbell quoted by Joachim Jostin in gaps in the Warren Commission report, page 206. Okay, there's a lot going on in this fucking sentence here. First of all, Joaquin Josten, Joesten, is an old school JFK researcher who just kind of fucking vanished all of a sudden. Never really got much accomplished, but came up with some interesting stuff that you really can't find anymore. If you can locate any of Joaquin Josten's early books around, they would be one hell of a find. And so this is getting to the point where the two reporters who went to Ruby's apartment after the shooting were both fucking murdered. They were both assassinated. One of them was killed with a karate chop to the fucking neck. Wah! Wah! So yeah, crazy shit, right? And Jim Kotha was choked to death. Wild, right? So that whole story needs to be dug into more. I know people have already done it, and people have written books on the murders associated with the Kennedy assassination, and I don't really want to be duplicating anybody's work. But I definitely would like to get to the bottom of some of these. Like, these murders of these fucking reporters would be pretty cool. 10864. Austin, Texas, 10-7. The state Supreme Court refused today to hear the Texas State Bar Association charges against Melvin Belli, who defended Jack Ruby last spring. State Bar contended that Melvin Belli should be barred from practicing law in Texas because of his conduct during and after the Ruby trial. When Mr. Belli learned of the court action today, he said the same bunch that's beaten in their own Supreme Court is now moving before the Rich Man's Insurance Club, the American Bar Association, to kick me out of there. Next, they will move to have my membership at the Book of the Month Club revoked. So it looks like not much has changed since 64, and what is that, 60 fucking years. They're still trying to get people banned, right? 10964 Dallas, Melvin Belli says he doesn't believe Jack Ruby gunned down Lee Harvey Oswald to keep Mrs. Jacqueline Kennedy from having to return to the scene of her husband's assassination. The fiery Belli rendered this opinion in his book entitled Dallas Justice. He said Ruby's story of trying to protect Mrs. Kennedy from a harrowing court appearance at Oswald's trial did not add up, although it was a story in which he, Ruby, persisted off and on until the end of the trial. 1964, Dallas Justice, the real story of Jack Ruby and his trial, Melvin M. Belli, with Maurice C. Carroll, David McKay Publishers. That's the name of the full book. 1021-64, Dallas District Judge Joe B. Brown said last night he will take no action on a request that he oust defense lawyers Clayton Fowler and Joe Tonnehill from the Jack Ruby murder case. Mrs. Eva Grant made the request in a letter. She asked Brown to rule that the only, quote, attorneys of record in her brother's case are Sol Dan of Detroit, Charles Bellows of Chicago, and Phil Burleson of Dallas. Fowler, presently chief of the defense staff, says he was hired by Ruby personally, and the family cannot fire him. Mrs. Grant said she acted under power of attorney from her brother granted on February 4th of that year. So it looks like they didn't have much faith in Jack to say the right shit, did they? 1028-64, story on Carousel Club and its current manager, Diana Hunter, a former performer there, now running the club for an investment firm which apparently took over the mortgage. See Ruby 927 AP 1118-64 is probably what it should be. Ruby's former night spot Carousel Club is closed. Other owners have tried but failed to make a success of it. 1028-64, Dallas, Jack Ruby's chief defense counsel, and an appeals expert asked District Judge Joe B. Brown today to let them step out of the case. Clayton Fowler, head of Ruby's defense team since last June, and Emmett Colvin Jr. filed motions to withdraw from the case. In requesting their release, two lawyers noted that Mrs. Eva Grant last week asked the court that all lawyers on the case except Phil Burleson be removed. Both motions said Mrs. Grant's letter requesting removal of the lawyers was prepared in Burleson's office. Fowler stated that the letter was written, evidently with his Burleson's knowledge and acquiescence. 1028-64, Fowler said a secret group of lawyers are drawing their own appeal for the convicted slayer. The judge said he probably would leave the case in the hands of Phil Burleson and Joe Tonnehill. Both attorneys said they intended to continue representing Ruby. At least 8 other lawyers have been on the defense team at one time or another since Ruby shot Oswald. From the Associated Press. 11-14-64, Foreman's record has indeed been little short of miraculous. During his flamboyant career, he has represented no fewer than 700 accused killers who had the presence of mind to tell loved ones, get Percy Foreman. All right, Percy Foreman's a fucking CIA lawyer. Okay? Percy Foreman represented fucking Vincent Caltagirone Jr. during the trial of fucking Candy Mossler. Hello. Vincent Calderon Jr., the real Raul. And the short tramp, right? Represented by Percy fucking Foreman. Part of the evidence that I fucking used to make that conclusion that he was working with CIA and he was Raul. Or else he wouldn't have gotten Percy motherfucking Foreman as his fucking lawyer. It's hilarious. If you get Percy Foreman as your fucking lawyer, you work for the CIA. That's how it goes. Foreman's record has indeed little been short of miraculous. During his flamboyant career, he's represented no fewer than 700 accused killers. Oh my God. That's crazy because that tells me the CIA's got a lot of killers on their fucking hands. Who had the presence of mind to tell loved ones, get Percy Foreman. That's hilarious. Only 50 of the 700, ever so as much, went to jail. God, that goes to show the corruption of our system, doesn't it? And of the 370 murder cases which Foreman has brought before a jury, only one ended in death for the accused. Shortly after gunning down Oswald, Jack Ruby issued a call for Foreman's services from his Dallas jail cell. But in one of the more bizarre twists of that period, Ruby's family balked at what it considered Foreman's demand for an excessive fee. As Foreman tells it today, Ruby's family was quoted a figure which happened to be 4 times higher than the fee I had actually asked. And they turned it down. I don't know what happened. I don't know how something like that happened, but it did. Get Percy Foreman, Saturday Evening Post, Thomas Martin, Patrick O'Brien. 11/15/64. From Roundup Story on anniversary of assassination, his lawyers hope to have his trial appealed by the end of the year. If Ruby cares, he doesn't seem to show it. He would rather talk to Henry Wade, the prosecutor who convicted him, to die than to his own lawyers. He sits in his cell, his mind possibly gone, his nightclub closed, then reopened under new management, his beloved dogs he called, his children given away. He keeps but 2 things in his cell, a Bible and a picture of John F. Kennedy. Associated Press, Sid Moody. 11/18/64, Dallas. Ruby's lawyers hope to win a reversal of the death sentence when they argue before the Texas Court of Criminal Appeals in Austin sometime next spring. They will contend, among other things, that local conditions made it impossible for Ruby to get a fair trial in Dallas, and that testimony from certain police officers which tended to show malice on Ruby's part should have been ruled inadmissible. Tony Hill said Ruby might be a free man in a year if the Austin court reverses the case. If the appellate court supports us on the issue of inadmissible police testimony, he said, then the element of malice will be gone from the case. Murder without malice means 2 to 5 years, and considering time off for good behavior, Jack already will have served the minimum time on such a sentence. Both Burleson and Tannehill said a sanity hearing could not be ruled out. If a jury found Ruby insane, then he would be committed to a mental institution where his lawyers say he belongs. 11/18/64, Dallas. Ruby, the once well-groomed, well-exercised nightclub operator, is now a sloppy, befuddled man who apparently suffers from delusions of persecution. In his constantly guarded jail quarters, wearing white coveralls and sandal-type shoes, Ruby waits. Sheriff Bill Decker maintains strict security measures. Ruby's food each day is selected at random from serving carts to avoid the possibility of poisoning. His visitors are restricted to his family. His rabbi and his lawyers, those allowed to see him, say he often appears to lose touch with reality and raves about how Jews are suffering because he killed Oswald. Oh, fuck you, Jack Ruby. Does Ruby realize the first anniversary of the assassination is approaching? I'm sure he's aware of it, said Burleson, but he doesn't like to talk about these things anymore. 11/21/64, Dallas. Lawyers gathered in the Dallas County Courthouse chambers of District Judge Joe B. Brown yesterday to sign the transcript papers of the month-long Jack Ruby murder trial. His lawyers plan now to appeal Ruby's death sentence to the Court of Criminal Appeals in Austin. 11/24/64, Washington. Marina Oswald disclosed in testimony released yesterday that she had written a letter to attorneys prosecuting Jack Ruby asking that her husband's killer be spared the death penalty. Mrs. Oswald said at the time that she had not mailed the letter. 11/24/64, story on Ruby's lie detector test in Dallas County Jail, 7/18/64. Commission testimony disclosed that Warren was allowed to talk to Ruby alone. 11/24/64, Dallas. Sheriff Bill Decker said to Ruby spends much of his time playing cards and dominoes with guards assigned to his cell. Decker keeps Ruby apart from the other prisoners to make certain they do not harm him. Decker refuses to let reporters see Ruby. As a result, they must depend on hearsay accounts when writing about Ruby's physical and mental condition. Defense attorneys say Ruby has, quote, gone steadily downhill since his arrest. 11/25/64, Washington. In the first 24 hours after Ruby shot Oswald a year ago yesterday, messages of congratulations began pouring in for Ruby. Copies of 102 of them are among the exhibits in the Warren Commission's report on the assassination of Kennedy and the slaying of Oswald. 11/30/64, Fort Worth. Melvin Belli revealed he recently wrote a letter to District Judge Joe Brown of Dallas and asked him to commit Ruby to a mental hospital. Quote, "It was a letter from one human being to another," Belli said. "I asked him to remember the spirit of the holiday season that put Jack where he belongs." I guess partial text of the letter filed. Ruby, 12/4/64 in the Associated Press. 11/30/64, Fort Worth. Melvin Belli said he did not intend to see or call Ruby, explaining that it would cause too much of a commotion. He predicted the death sentence would be reversed and that Ruby never will die in the electric chair. He said Ruby has called him several times in his San Francisco office. "I know it's Jack," he said, "because it comes collect," he said. Quote, "So many people are tapping the telephone when Ruby calls, there's hardly enough juice to relay the call over the Rocky Mountains." 12/25/64, Ruby has sent 5 $20 bills by a West Coast Sunday school class. And that, ladies and gentlemen, wraps up Jack Ruby's year of 1964 and the information that came out during the trial of 1964. This was all gathered and notated by Harold Weisberg, located in the Harold Weisberg archive as copy of Ruby, 1964.pdf. So that will do it for today, ladies and gentlemen. I'm going to have some soul searching to do to see if we're going to continue on this theme of Jack Ruby or what we're going to go to. How about this? How about you tell me what you want to hear me talk about and email me at corey@coreyhughes.org. Let me know what you want me to talk about and I'll review the emails and perhaps I'll come up with something different for tomorrow. Otherwise, I'm just going to have to go and grab something that catches my attention. But remember, we were on New Orleans for a long time. We did a ton on Lauren Hall. I found another fucking 120 files on Lauren Hall. Yep. The National Security Archive of Lauren Hall. So a lot of it's duplication. A lot of it we've already seen before. But again, it's okay to duplicate some materials if they're in context, right? And so nobody's going to remember the shit the first time. So I really don't mind some duplication, just as long as it's not a ton. But that is going to do it for me today. If you haven't bought the book, please buy the book. It's on Amazon. You can get it for $25. I have 4 copies of the hardcover edition signed that are ready to ship out right now. It takes me 3 weeks to a month to get them in once I set an order. So I've been selling these pretty goddamn consistently. It's pretty fucking amazing how many people want to sign a copy of this shit. But in reality, when it comes to this hardcover book, the truth of the matter is I've probably sold 150 or 200 of them. And I don't anticipate selling more than like 300 or 400 by the end of this year when my next edition comes out. And these become a collector item, right? I'm anticipating I'm probably going to cut off all production of hardcovers at the latest at like 500. So it's going to be an extremely rare first edition. And if you look for fucking Michael Collins Piper Final Judgment first editions, you're paying $700, $800 to $1,000 for a copy of that shit. So I highly recommend everyone pick up a copy of the hardcover, whether from me directly signed or from Amazon. But yeah, that's my rant on buying my shit. So please buy my shit, listen to the podcast, share it with your friends and all that good stuff. And I will be back here tomorrow. Thanks, everybody.